I'm Caroline Hyde in London, in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, US officials pause the J&J vaccine push after 6 women develop a rare and severe form of blood clotting. We'll have the latest, plus what it means in the effort to outpace fast-spreading variants. Plus, we are getting a Coinbase direct listing reference price set at $250, giving it a possible $65 billion valuation, and that price ahead of its debut. We'll talk to investor Garry Tan. He wrote one of the first company's checks. We'll get his perspective on where crypto's headed and other unicorns in his stable. And another big step in ride-hailing. Cruise inks a deal to run driverless taxis in Dubai, just 2 years away. We'll get details from CEO Dan Aman. These stories in a moment, but first, US stocks climbed record highs, particularly led higher by tech. Let's go to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow with the latest on that, and of course, Coinbase's 250 reference price. Ed.
Right, a lot to take in. I guess the story of the day was inflation. What inflation, right? We got that CPI print for the month of March above consensus, but not enough to worry investors that we'll see any meaningful change in monetary policy or in fiscal policy. And what we saw, fresh records for US equities. The S&P 500, the main gauge of US equities, up by 0.3%, but tech shares really leading the way in the NASDAQ 100, a very tech-heavy index, up by more than 1%. Still some weakness in semiconductors, though, and the US 10-year yield a little lower, actually. Come with me into my Bloomberg and look at this chart. It's interesting. We got a fresh record for the NASDAQ 100 for the first time since February 16th. If you look on the kind of middle of your chart on that yellow line, it took us quite a few months between September and February to get records. But this new record is come much more quickly, and it's interesting to see the behavior of bond yields, right? They've been trading within a much more narrow range, and as we've discussed on this show so many times, rising yields have really put pressure on tech companies that have big valuations, stretched valuations. Big story, though, is crypto. All about crypto on Tuesday, and so much of that relates to the Coinbase direct listing, $250 per share reference price given by NASDAQ. That would give it a valuation pretty significantly below the one that the private markets gave it in March. That's where we were swapping shares for $350 a share, a valuation in excess of $90 billion. But all of that kind of optimism was boosting Bitcoin on Tuesday. We breached the 63,000 mark. You see a little softness as we go on through the session, and that actually boosted some of those crypto-related stocks. Bitcoin has risen from around 28,000 to 63,000 so far year to date, and so much excitement is around this Coinbase listing. Maybe this reference price puts things on a little bit more muted tone. I don't know. You've got some smart people you're going to talk to in the rest of the show, but I know that at least you and I are excited, Caroline.
Yeah, price targets going way high on some of those calls from analysts. Ed Ludlow, great roundup. We thank you so much. Meanwhile, let's return to the story, of course, of the J&J shot, because 6 US women between the ages of 18 and 48 who received Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine developed blood clots. This after similar issues, of course, with the AstraZeneca shot.
The real thing that is so notable here is not just the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis or the thrombocytopenia. Those two things can occur. It's their occurrence together that makes a pattern, and that pattern is very, very similar to what was seen in Europe with another vaccine.
Now, in the United States, nearly 7 million doses of the J&J single-dose vaccine have been administered, and the news has prompted the U.S. federal health agencies to call for a pause in its distribution. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michelle Cortez to break it down, because when I look at the numbers, Michelle, 6 cases, more than almost 7 million doses given. This is an abundance of caution, but necessary, right?
It's absolutely a vanishingly small number. The concern here is that what doctors would normally do in the case of a blood clot could actually be harmful to women who are experiencing this particular result. And so the doctors want to make sure, the public health officials want to make sure that they know what to tell doctors to do if they're confronted with something like this. You can think of it the same way that we thought about the anaphylactic shock that we were hearing some reports about with the mRNA vaccines early on. It's not a big deal if you know what to do, if you have EpiPens on hand. The problem with these clots at this particular moment is they need to get their ducks in a row so that they know how to treat people who are experiencing this so that they're not worsening the situation.
Okay, talk to us though about what the knock-on effect from a PR perspective. It sort of breaks my heart a bit that both AstraZeneca and J&J have suffered this, and both of them are doing this on a not-for-profit basis as well, but they have very similarly made kind of vaccines, right? And how can they stop the knock to safety concerns that we've seen so prevalently here in Europe when it comes to the AstraZeneca shot?
Exactly. They both use an adenovirus in order to deliver the vaccine into healthy cells to be producing these spike proteins, which is what activates the immune system. And they're using the same type of virus. So that is what the concern is that's going on here. The point that you're making, that the side effect is vanishingly small and that it is potentially derailing vaccinations, not just in the U.S., not just in Europe, but potentially around the world, it does mean that we might see more coronavirus infections and we could see more deaths from COVID-19 as a result of that. The thing is you have to remember that the people who are getting the vaccine aren't necessarily, they're not at all sick, and they might not ever be sick. They might not contract the virus at all. So it's one of these situations where you're potentially putting someone in harm's way that might not have otherwise been at risk for anything bad happening. They might have come through a coronavirus infection just fine in order to protect other people. So you have to be careful going about handling it.
Of course, Michelle. And maybe the U.S. is just fine. I mean, we're looking at headlines coming that Pfizer can deliver 10% more doses to the U.S. by the end of May, says the CEO. Moderna's citing really strong efficacy data in 6 months with their vaccine, about 95% efficacy still. So the U.S. has a lot of those shots. What about the equity story here? Because J&J was so important because you didn't have to store it at such freezing temperatures, and it sort of helped perhaps not just those in the U.S., but further afield.
Absolutely. The AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson shots, when you take them together, and if you add in the Sputnik shot, which it works in a similar manner, also one of the Chinese vaccines works like this. These are the vaccines that were intended to protect the globe. They are the ones that can get out to the more rural areas. You only have to give some of them the J&J shot one time. So if you have people that are hard to get to twice for whatever reason, this is the way that we were planning on protecting everyone. And of course, you have to protect everybody in the globe, even in the remote locations, in order to stop that virus from coming back. So we really need to get to that point. The bottom line is I think that we're going to figure out a way to balance the safety and efficacy of these shots. You're 100% right. We need these vaccines. The globe needs them. Even if you were saying, the U.S. has plenty of mRNA vaccines, you can't get them to some places in certain countries. So even if we had more of them, it wouldn't necessarily resolve the problem. The thing is, though, think about it. I mean, it's 6 people out of almost 7 million. We're watching this so closely. This is not a large side effect.
Michelle Cortez, we want to thank you. All important on the vaccine, but all important on what's happening in the markets. Coming up, we're looking ahead to Coinbase's direct listing with one of the company's first investors, Garry Tan of Initialized Capital. This as Bitcoin hits new highs. This is Bloomberg. So Coinbase, the fast-growing crypto exchange, is expected to go public Wednesday at a staggering valuation. We're hearing, of course, the reference price being set at $250. That means about $65 billion, but many feel it could reach about $100 billion or more. Bloomberg's What You Missed co-host Joe Weisenthal took a look at how far crypto has come and what this means in terms of the moment for the future of currency.
Coinbase is going public, but it's not just another direct listing. It's a symbol of how far crypto has come and its increasing institutional acceptance. Think about it. Bitcoin has been around since 2009, and despite sustained rallies, the mainstream basically always viewed it with extreme skepticism.
This was the biggest Ponzi scheme in human history, and it's going bust.
Bitcoin, which in our view is nothing else but a Ponzi scheme.
I could care less what Bitcoin trades for, how it trades, why it trades, who trades it. If you're stupid enough to buy it, you'll pay the price for it one day.
I think it's a scam for criminals around the world.
It's an index of money laundering.
Fast forward to now, Bitcoin has more than doubled just this year, and it's up more than tenfold since its lows last March. And now with the total cryptocurrency market worth over $2 trillion, the large institutions are ready to play a role.
Bitcoin should be worth about $400,000.
Coinbase is the largest U.S. cryptocurrency exchange, and investor interest is massive. In fact, it's so big that despite being less than a decade old, the company is, by some measures, larger than established exchanges like ICE or NASDAQ.
I think that there are many that are sort of standing outside the gates, just waiting for that moment when they can have exposure to Bitcoin.
Coinbase generated revenue of $1.8 billion in the first 3 months of the year and had 56 million verified users in the quarter. The numbers don't lie. Crypto seems here to stay.
Bloomberg's Joe Weisenthal there on how Coinbase could change, of course, the crypto landscape. But from where the company is heading to where it came from, I'd like to bring in one investor who wrote one of Coinbase's first checks. When the company was just starting up in 2012, Garry Tan, Initialized Capital co-founder and managing partner, joins us now. Just mind-boggling to get a reference price of 250, which means 65 billion. People talking about hundreds of billions in terms of market capitalization. Garry, what was the price that you paid? What can you even remember what the capitalization was when you signed that check?
Oh man, I think there's been some splits. So it's something like sub $10 million pre-money. So which is a very that's what you get to do when you fund people when they are that early, when they're just a single founder, haven't added co-founders yet, sometimes a demo. That's what I love to do, is sort of as an early stage investor, be that first money in when they have a dollar and a dream, really.
So for full disclosure, my husband is a senior manager at Coinbase. So I get a bit about the company, but I want to understand what you get about the company and what you think about the opportunity here. Are you going to be selling into this direct listing tomorrow? Is the market cap going to be attracting you to do that? And where do you think it can go from here?
Well, for me, my journey with crypto is really about the long term. And, I want to start off by just talking about Brian Armstrong. I mean, to me, he's sort of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak really in one person, because he can both sell it and build it. And that was really what just jumped out at me when I first met this founder. So, for him to be able to walk away from 8 figures at Airbnb to, 10, 11 figures as a founder, I mean, that is a testament to true American innovation. For someone, it is the privilege that we have as, creators and builders in tech. But, I think that that's what really drew me. Like, he realized that software was going to eat money, and he was working at basically the blessed place, which was Airbnb. And I think that they're just getting started. Like, I think Coinbase is this decade's Microsoft, Netscape, Google, or Facebook. I think that there is so much that could be here. The PC revolution was really about a fringe set of people saying that, that they wanted it, and they wanted a PC on every desk in every home. And it took, the vision of Bill Gates to be able to bring that about. And, Apple had to create the iPhone to bring about sort of the smartphone. And for each of these revolutions, you need sort of a cornerstone company to attract capital, to bring together the world's best product people, software engineers, and designers. And I think that that's actually why we're talking about Coinbase today. Brian was able to be that sort of magnet for that talent. And there are very, very few people, shockingly few people in the world who are capable of building something that is that good and to attract that level of talent.
A lot of the valuation, of course, people are going to see institutional money wanting to get exposure to crypto in an equity-like fashion and perhaps in a blue chip-like fashion. But what does Coinbase's, obvious relationship to Bitcoin and the like going to do for it? Is it going to make it very volatile? How are we going to have to educate that it can do well amid volatility?
Well, one of the things that I've learned over the years, as an early investor in Coinbase, is we've seen every run and every bust. It's happened over and over again. the magical moment for me of product market fit working with Brian Armstrong was the moment that Bitcoin went from $5 to $20 on its first run to $1,000. And this is sort of, and it crashed back down. And then it did it again in 2017. And, we're sort of, at this point, diamond hands. We are used to this. And so that's why the number one thing I think of when people are considering whether to invest in Coinbase is actually zoom out. Think about what crypto means for society from here. I think that I really underestimated what store of value would mean, right? If all of crypto is worth 2 trillion today, all of gold is 10 trillion. We are sort of maybe farther along in that journey, but that's really only one of a whole bunch of use cases that are coming online that I think are really going to remake all of society. And to weave the story together, I think it's really fitting that Brian learned about startups at Airbnb. That was software eating hospitality. Bitcoin and crypto via Coinbase is software eating all of finance. Money is a fundamental piece of all of society. And this is the on-ramp. This is the keystone.
Garry, I love that you use the term diamond hands when in that portfolio that you invested in Coinbase, first off, there was also Reddit, of course, and LendUp, Instacart, Goat. I mean, kudos to you, Garry Tan, for those choices. Initialized co-founder and managing partner. Exciting day for you tomorrow. We thank you. Meanwhile, coming up, General Motors self-driving Cruise is heading to Dubai. Its first international expansion outside of San Francisco. CEO Dan Aman will join us next to discuss this deal and when we can expect to see its cars put to commercial use in the United States. This is Bloomberg. Cruise, it's of course the self-driving car unit backed and majority owned by General Motors, has signed a deal with Dubai's Roads and Transit Authority to begin operating its self-driving taxis in the city as soon as 2023. Now, this marks the company's first international expansion outside of the United States. Joining us now for more is Cruise CEO Dan Aman, and from San Francisco, my colleague Ed Ludlow, who of course knows all things to do with electric and autonomous vehicle space. Dan, first and foremost, why do you think Dubai chose you? What do you think they want to achieve by 2023?
Well, they laid out a vision going back, I think, 4 or 5 years ago to make driverless trips 25% of total trips traveled in Dubai by 2030. And I think they've chosen Cruise because they believe we have the best possible chance of helping them make that vision a reality, given performance of our core technology, our purpose-built vehicle, the Cruise Origin, the fact that we're all electric, and the fact that we're partnered with General Motors and Honda and have the ability to build these vehicles and deploy them at really big scale and make a really big impact.
Dan, do you expect to launch commercially in the UAE before you launch commercially in the United States?
No, we expect to launch first in the US, beginning in San Francisco, and then expanding from there, and then moving to the UAE as our first international market after our US launch.
So if that's the case, why does Cruise not put a firm date for a commercial launch in the US?
Well, it's 2021. We've begun driverless testing. We're making rapid progress with the Cruise Origin. We've talked about beginning operations in Dubai in 2023. So you can infer that a US launch will happen sometime in the middle there.
Talk to us about delivery, other mobility, use cases, and also just how you fold all of this in to what we're seeing with chips at the moment, Dan. And has that in any way been an issue for the new developments that you want to be going into?
Well, on the delivery side, we announced a partnership with Walmart back last November and have kicked off a pilot program with them. That's actually happening in Phoenix in Arizona. We'll have more news to share on that front relatively soon. So we certainly see that as a big opportunity in addition to the ride-hail business, which will kick off here in San Francisco. On the chip side of things, it hasn't really directly impacted us at all at this stage. We're still making really rapid progress on everything that we're working on and are in pretty good shape and moving really quickly.
Dan, when will we see Cruise IPO? Is that contingent on you becoming revenue generating?
Well, all of our focus right now, Ed, is on getting our initial commercial products here launched, both on the ride-hail side and on the delivery side. And that's really where all the energy of the company is right now, is making that happen and getting the product on the road.
We've seen a lot of consolidation in the self-driving space. You recently acquired Voyage, which was kind of specialized, focused on retirement communities. Do you think you'll see further consolidation? There's a lot of players out there. Are there any types of companies, any names that you've got your eye on?
Yeah, I think consolidation for an industry like ours at this stage is pretty inevitable. We're not surprised to see the consolidation that has already transpired, and I think we're down to a pretty small list of larger companies that are that have a real shot of commercializing this technology. The Voyage team is a super talented and experienced team, and we're really pleased and thrilled to have had them join us on the cruise mission, and great to have them on board.
Give us a bird's-eye perspective of when you're looking at regulatory environments, countries that are pushing ahead. I mean, clearly Dubai, as you said, set out a plan years back. How is the regulatory landscape unfolding as you envisaged it? Is it faster? Is it slower? Is it more concerning?
I'd say in general it's on track, but we think it is really important that that the United States and other countries around the world do set a very clear regulatory pathway, and that's one of the things where Dubai has demonstrated real leadership, is their willingness to create that pathway and to make this a reality of putting self-driving technology on the roads in large scale. So we're feeling good and constructive on it, but it's really important that the U.S. maintain a leadership position here, and I think all indications are that we're headed in the right direction.
Dan, as you know, I'm a San Francisco resident. I see your vehicles testing every single day. When am I actually going to be able to hail a Cruise Origin shuttle, get in it and take a ride here in the Bay Area, California?
So the Cruise Origin begins production, later part of next year, early part of 2023 is the time frame for Origin production. But it's possible that you'd be able to take a ride in one of our existing AVs before that time.
There you go, Ed. Getting in there soon. Cruise CEO Dan Ammann, absolute joy to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, always love you writing these interviews with us. Thank you. Now, coming up, Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn on President Biden's, well, $2 trillion infrastructure plan and where America stands on cybersecurity in China. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in London, filling in for Emily Chang, having a well-deserved rest. Meanwhile, it's a banner day for both stocks and bonds. Let's get a recap on U.S. markets. Bloomberg Kriti Gupta, and it was tech leading the charge today.
That tech outperformance, so interesting because it actually manifested in the NASDAQ 100 hitting a record high. Now, this is so significant because just check out the chart behind me. Since the year really started, you've seen such a choppy history for tech. But today, really the story of the day, and why. What really drove that? It was that defensive trade really sparked by that Johnson & Johnson news. Flip up the boards, and I want to show you how this all prevailed. Of course, the FDA halting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's sinking the stock, but also really playing out in a way that some of those recovery names, those travel names like American Airlines and Carnival, underperforming. But those stay-at-home stocks like Zoom, those 2020 favorites, strongly in the green alongside those big tech names. And flip up the boards, and I want to show you one last board of just some of those single stories, because it wasn't just big tech that rallied. You had some single names in there too. Nvidia, of course, hitting a record high after a wave of praise from analysts. Remember, just yesterday, they unveiled that they're actually venturing into microprocessors, so analysts really smiling on that. Magna International also in the green, and this, of course, on on news, of a potential contract with Apple. And lastly, I want to bring to your attention Roblox and Hasbro. Now, those aren't names that traditionally come to mind with tech, but they actually came up with a deal that they're going to bring Nerf and Monopoly to the video game platform. So a lot going on in the tech space, Caroline.
Tech and toys. The perfect marriage. Kriti Gupta, Bloomberg Markets reporter, we thank you. And of course, Kriti was just talking about Nvidia doing really well on the market today. And of course, yesterday it unveiled its first server microprocessors, extending a push on Monday into Intel's most lucrative market with a chip aimed at handling the most complicated computing work. Now, Nvidia shares continue to rally while Intel slumped on the news of the CPU named Grace after the late pioneering computer scientist Grace Hopper. But that's not the only thing Nvidia revealed at Monday's event. The company also announced, the Morpheus application framework that aims to help cybersecurity partners develop improved AI solutions. Cloudflare, one of the key newly announced partners there, CEO Matthew Prince, joins us now in an exclusive interview. Matthew, great to see your tie-up there. And you say in the press release about it that you're working with NVIDIA, will be bringing developers powerful AI tools to build applications that will power the future. Talk to us about what applications will be built through this.
Sure. So 4 years ago, Cloudflare launched our edge computing platform, which we call Workers. And what Workers allows is any developer anywhere in the world to write code and deploy it across all of Cloudflare's network, which today spans more than 200 cities, more than 100 countries worldwide. What we announced with NVIDIA today is that we're going to be adding their GPU processors, which is a special kind of chip that makes artificial intelligence tasks easier and faster and more powerful across that. What that means is if you're building smart doorbells or you're building any type of device which today may not have the power in and of itself to run advanced artificial intelligence on it, now that artificial intelligence can be within a few milliseconds on the network itself, powered by both Cloudflare and NVIDIA.
How do you think it helps not only you from a sales perspective, but does it help Cloudflare continue to protect from a cybersecurity perspective across all its platforms? How are you thinking in that respect?
So we've always used artificial intelligence and machine learning at Cloudflare in order to automatically identify threats and security and other challenges. And we've used a number of different GPU vendors, including NVIDIA, in order to power that intelligence behind the scenes. What's unique about what we announced today with them is that that same ability that we've had as a company, we're now making available to any developer anywhere in the world so that they can make their devices more powerful. And yeah, I do believe that there will be applications for developers to build specialized and enhanced security on top of our existing platform.
Talk to us about the security landscape right now, Matthew. And you know, we've got people starting to see the end in sight of a pandemic, starting to return to work. Of course, work from home has put a lot of pressure on corporate cybersecurity efforts. Is the landscape getting a little easier, or is that just never going to be the case?
You know, I think that there are a number of things which are going on. The first is, I don't think any company is ever going to be completely the same after the pandemic as they were before. We've all learned a whole new set of skills, and it's impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. And so I think employees are going to demand more flexibility. And so while there will be different companies at different points in the spectrum, I think that there is going to be much more remote work. And that means that there are different challenges to security. You can't rely on just all of your employees coming into the metaphorical castle and surrounding it with a moat and assuming that you're going to be safe. It's a much more complicated landscape. At the same time, I think we at Cloudflare and a number of other great companies are really pioneering the zero trust efforts in order to make sure that no matter where you are, anywhere on the network, it's almost like you will be secure no matter what. And so we think of it as almost being like bulkheads in a ship, so that if there is some new vulnerability, like today we heard about new vulnerabilities in the Microsoft Exchange server, which were released by the National Security Administration, if those get released, and somehow you have one application compromised on your network, it doesn't compromise the entire ship. And so I think that sort of change is a real sea change, which is compensating, in fact, more than compensating for the increasingly complex environment in which companies find their employees working from.
Of course, cybersecurity, not the only security issue for many players out there. In your space, we're seeing, well, supply chain insecurity. We're seeing the impact on chips in particular. Has that in any way affected your business? How do you see it playing out from the industry perspective?
It's been a really challenging last 12 months from a supply chain perspective. I think and I'm very proud of our team for getting in front of some of the shortages and some of the supply chain issues that are out there. We have always optimized around what we think of as effectively just-in-time delivery, where we're able to stockpile various components in locations around the world and build out our network as it's needed. But it's been complicated for two reasons. One, because you are seeing these shortages of equipment and supply, but then two, because we've just had an unprecedented level of demand. If you go back 12 months ago, our team was sitting staring at screens as we watched internet usage around the world almost double. And we needed to make sure that our network held up and was able to keep things online. I'm proud that our team has been able to do that. I'm proud we've been able to stay in front of these shortages, and I think we'll be able to continue to do that going forward.
And meanwhile, striking new deals like we see with Nvidia. We thank you so much, Matthew Prince, Cloudflare CEO. Always great to get your take on the show. Great to speak with you once again. Meanwhile, coming up, Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn on President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan, where America stands on cybersecurity and China. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg. Over to Washington now, and President Biden's $2.25 trillion infrastructure and tax package, spanning plans to revamp roads and bridges, enhancing the power grid, protection against cyber attacks, and brings more, of course, support to the elderly as well. But it is getting pushback from the GOP. Now, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell calling on the White House to scale back the bill, saying some items just don't belong in an infrastructure stimulus plan, such as, well, support for the elderly care, for example. Joining me now to dive a bit deeper into where Democrats and Republicans are meeting headwinds or indeed can come together in a bipartisan nature, Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn in Washington. Senator, it's wonderful to have some time with you amid a very busy day. First and foremost, can you talk to us about what you think infrastructure should encapsulate for you?
What we have traditionally focused on in infrastructure is roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, water systems. We have even included broadband in infrastructure, but never have we seen the litany of things that are now being discussed as being infrastructure. Bernie Sanders even said today that humans are infrastructure. So they're trying to put in place a spending bill that already they're saying is above $2 trillion, maybe as high as $2.7 trillion. That's an awful lot of debt, Caroline. And what we think we should do is focus on those roads and bridges and ports and airports and waterways and broadband. And the last infrastructure bill that we worked toward last year, and of course the House did not agree with the Senate on this bill, but it was about $325 billion. That is more along the line of what we have spent. And quite honestly, in Tennessee, where I am from, what we hear from people every single day is we want our roadways fixed. We want it to be safe to get to work, to get children to school. We want to make certain that we have the ability for commerce to take place over our highways and our interstate highways. We want our ports to be dredged and to be safe for products that are coming in.
But debt is cheap at the moment, Senator, and indeed, perhaps you can have even more commerce if people are freed up from having to care for loved ones and are able to get into the workforce to be more productive. Is there not a better compromise, a slightly higher price tag? And what do you think can really be achieved on a bipartisan nature, do you think?
You know, Caroline, one of the concerns in this bill is there is more money that is going to go into electric cars than there is into roads and bridges and highways. And are we concerned about elder care? Elder care is something I do every single day with elderly relatives. But are you concerned with that? Absolutely. But an infrastructure bill is not the place to have that discussion. And it is not the place for that type of funding. We have other funding avenues that come through other departments, and it really is inappropriate to say that that is infrastructure, is the kitchen sink infrastructure, because they're definitely putting everything but the kitchen sink in this and calling it infrastructure. Is Ben & Jerry's ice cream infrastructure because it's made by humans? So these are the questions that people need to ask as they look at this. Look, we know that this bill is really a boondoggle bill. There is a way to appropriately address infrastructure, and indeed, I have had a bill, zero money, zero lies, very easy to help get infrastructure projects in the ground and moving. And that is to deal with some of the regulation and the mandates that many times prohibit our smaller communities and our rural counties from being able to repair those roads and bridges.
Talk to us about where you really have made bipartisan strides, and particularly to our audience. We are on Bloomberg Technology, of course, and you've been looking in particular at China within a supply chain. You've been looking at big tech and the power that it has within the United States, and where you think that there might be some competitive issues that you want to see tackled. Where do you see your priorities being met there in a bipartisan nature?
Yes, and Caroline, you're right. And I've talked with Bloomberg many times about the bipartisan leadership that I've brought to bear in these issues dealing with China. We're very concerned about the aggressive attitude of the Chinese Communist Party and how they are seeking global domination by the time we get to the midpoint of the century. And we are pushing back, and we're pleased our allies are pushing back on the Chinese Communist Party and Beijing when it comes to Huawei, when it comes to 5G advancement and utilizing their technology, when it comes to what they're doing in the Xinjiang province with the Uyghurs and the genocide that's being carried out there, the aggressions against the Hong Kong freedom fighters, the Tibetans, Mongolians, and of course what they're doing to Taiwan. We're concerned about all of that with China. Indeed, when it comes to big tech, we're continuing to work there. Facebook, of course, I know there are situations with how they've shared information with some governments, how we have other governments like the UK and the US have been successful in more successful in dealing with Facebook, but their lack of attention to privacy of their online users is something that we are focusing on right now. We are looking at our federal trade.
Do you want changes in antitrust
and we're
law,
reviewing.
Senator?
Yeah, and we're reviewing how antitrust, and there's bipartisan agreement there also, just like with privacy. The need for Section 230 reforms, which is something that we're discussing here. Looking at antitrust, I kind of look at this as the virtual you protection agenda. And it's looking at those issues of privacy, of data security, of antitrust, of looking at how big tech works in the marketplace and how they have been manipulating governmental entities, not only in the U.S., but around the globe.
We want to thank you for your time. I know you've got to rush back to vote, Senator, so thank you for speaking to our audience once again. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn on all things infrastructure and cyber. Thank you. Meanwhile, coming up, Apple invitations are out and they've announced their first product event will be held virtually next week. We're looking at what we can expect and if there's any new products on the horizon. That's next. This is Bloomberg. So President Biden's $2 trillion plus infrastructure plan also aims to address parts of the environment, including, well, of course, creating opportunities for sustainability. We are going to be talking about the balancing clean power costs, and the US must secure, of course, all things in terms of its environmental approach. But before we dig into what's happening in terms of the US Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm said that the US must balance clean power costs and that the US must secure the battery supply chain too. Granholm spoke with Bloomberg's Ethan Zindler during the BNEF summit.
The administration is supportive of tax credits for battery technology, whether it's attached or whether it's obviously utility scale, you name it. We want to see battery technology develop and deploy. And at the DOE, we're focused on continuing to bring down the price of batteries and finding substitutes for lithium, for example. We're also really interested in developing the full-on supply chain. You see that in the American Jobs Plan as well, to be able to mine responsibly, of course, for critical materials that we know we've got beneath the surface of so many pockets of this country, whether it's lithium or cobalt. The bottom line is we can do that, and we can do it responsibly. We can even process responsibly, but we've got to get the ball rolling to create that supply chain. You're speaking to me on a week where the administration is convening people from the automotive industry because we have lost the ability to produce in this country semiconductors. Well, that makes, if we can't produce the means to our energy independence through batteries or through or the ability to build EVs because we don't have enough semiconductors, then we've really lost as a nation out on our own independence, our economic independence. So, some stuff is not going to be built here, but I'm telling you, these critical components, these critical supplies that we know we need for our own energy, we have to look at that as a real moment for America. If we decide we want to have the means to our own energy independence, we've got to build that stuff here. And that may mean that we've got to invest a bit to make that happen. So the bottom line is, I think, whether it's tax credits, whether it's refundable tax credits that can be monetized up front or over the period of time, but that's still all subject to negotiation clearly in Congress. The American Jobs Plan has laid out a framework of what things should look like, but hopefully we have robust support for battery storage, for energy storage.
US Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm there speaking with Bloomberg's Ethan Zindler at the BNEF summit. From all things infrastructure to all things Apple, and it says it will hold the first product unveiling of 2021 on April 20th, dubbing the event Spring Loaded in their media invitation. Now, Bloomberg reported recently that Apple plans to unveil a new iPad Pro line as early as this month. For more details about the event, let's bring in Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who covers their company for us, brings us all the scoops. Mark, first and foremost, what are you expecting at the event?
So thank you for having me. First of all, the big thing, of course, like you said, will be the new iPad Pros. These will be the first update to the iPad Pro line a little bit over a year. They released the current ones about mid-March last year. The big thing this year will be a new processor that is on par with the much faster chipsets inside of some of Apple's latest Macs with their M1 processors. There's going to be an updated port that can sync faster with more accessories, external monitors, and also a much improved camera system. But the big thing is actually going to be a new display on the larger of the two models, a new 12.9-inch model with what is called a mini LED display. That allows the screen to go much brighter and have better contrast ratios, so ultimately a better user experience. Other things in the pipeline are new iMac desktops with custom Apple chips, as well as a product called AirTags, which is basically like one of those tile gizmos. You slap it onto your bag, your wallet, what have you, and you can locate it through the Find My app on the iPhone.
Love a tile gizmo. Meanwhile, why is all of this significant for Apple at the moment? We always know that it's so important about innovation, the product roadmap. What do you think they're trying to demonstrate here?
Nothing that you're going to be seeing next week is going to be particularly innovative, in my humble opinion. There's nothing extraordinary that we haven't seen before from Apple or anyone else. These are more iterative updates. besides the iMac, if the iMac does indeed get launched next week, that's going to be a big deal. But on the iPad specifically, we're all talking about iterative, basic stuff here. However, the iPad has become an increasingly key product for Apple. The tablet, it made Apple $8.4 billion in revenue during Q1, so the holiday quarter in 2020. That was the most since 2014. Sales obviously jumped on demand from people working and studying from home during the pandemic. And now we're at the point, as you know, where students and employees are beginning to return to schools and offices in the coming months, which could spark yet another purchase cycle for the device, which is really key in work and school.
Always on top of these, of course, also working on the combined TV box speaker to revive home efforts. That was a great scoop you had the other day as well. Mark Gurman, we thank you. Stay well in LA. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. But tomorrow, you do not want to miss it, because we'll be ready to cover Coinbase's direct listing. Currently set at a reference price, of course, of $250, giving it, what, about a $65 billion valuation. But that's just for starters. Guests include Katie Haun, Andreessen Horowitz general partner, who's also on the board of Coinbase. Then there's Alexis Ohanian, you know him, founder of 776, early investor in Coinbase. Those guests tomorrow, right here, Bloomberg Technology. You're going to have Taylor Riggs taking the helm for that day. Thank you so much for joining us from New York, from San Francisco, and from right here in London. This is Bloomberg.